You know, Zara, your problem is that you think every story about humans is just propaganda. Zara Veltar looked up from her datapad, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence. A sure sign she was about to deliver one of her trademark reality checks.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kix. Did I miss the memo where propaganda became a dirty word?
Because last I checked, every species in the galaxy has been telling tall tales about their warriors since the dawn of interstellar travel. Kix, whose real name was something unpronounceable involving 17 clicks and a sound like a dying hyperdrive, shifted his crystalline form in what passed for a shrug among the Resonari. But the human stories are different. They're not about individual glory or divine intervention. They're about stubbornness. Stubbornness. Zara's tale. A elegant thing that could have been carved from midnight if midnight had been a semi-precious stone, twitched with amusement. Right, because nothing says galactic terror like being really, really persistent. They were sitting in the observation lounge of the merchant vessel Profit Margin, currently docked at Kepler Station for what their captain euphemistically called extended maintenance. In reality, Captain Voss had gotten into another argument with the dockmaster about berthing fees, and they'd all be stuck here until either his pride or his wallet gave out first. Smart money was on the wallet. Voss was cheap, but he wasn't stupid.
I'm serious, Kix continued, his voice carrying that harmonic undertone that made him sound like a choir of wind chimes having an existential crisis.
My cousin Trix served on a human ship for 6 months. She said they have this thing called spite that's basically a renewable energy source. Zara snorted, a sound that would have been delicate and musical if she'd been human, but came out more like a steam valve releasing pressure.
The Nixali were many things, graceful, intelligent, long-lived, but they weren't built for cute human-style expressions.
Your cousin also claimed she once saw a harvester queen do interpretive dance. Forgive me if I don't immediately update my xenobiology textbooks. That's different, and you know it.
Is it, though?
Zara leaned back in her chair, which had been designed by someone who clearly believed that comfort was a character flaw. Think about it. Every species has their myth. The Kithara claim they can phase through solid matter when sufficiently motivated. The Velkari insist their ancestors could breathe vacuum. And humans? Humans apparently turn into unstoppable berserkers when someone threatens their coffee supply. Kix's crystalline structure shifted to a deeper blue. Embarrassment, probably.
I never said anything about coffee. You didn't have to.
It's always coffee with the human stories. Coffee, or someone touching their stuff, or looking at their friends funny. According to the rumor mill, humans once started a war because someone mispronounced aluminum. Aluminium, corrected a voice from the doorway. And it wasn't a war, it was a very strongly worded letter. Zara turned to see a human walking into the lounge, and immediately felt that familiar flutter of cognitive dissonance that came with encountering a species that looked like it should be harmless but allegedly wasn't. This one was tall by human standards, maybe 6 feet, though she'd never been good with their measurement systems. With the kind of build that suggested he did physical labor for fun rather than necessity. His hair was dark and chronically messy, and he had the sort of smile that probably got him into trouble on a regular basis. "Eavesdropping, Garrett?" she asked, not bothering to hide her amusement. Garrett Reeves, the Profit Margin's human engineer, dropped into the chair across from them with the casual grace of someone who'd spent years working in variable gravity. In my defense, you're talking about my species in a public space. I'm practically obligated to provide expert commentary. Expert commentary, Zara repeated. Right, because you're obviously a typical example of human behavior. I'm hurt, Garrett said, pressing a hand to his chest in mock offense. I'm extremely typical.
I like sports I don't understand. I make terrible jokes, and I have strong opinions about things that don't matter.
I'm basically the human template. Kix leaned forward, his harmonic voice taking on an eager quality. Tell her about the siege of Proxima 7. Garrett's expression immediately shifted from playful to carefully neutral. I wasn't at Proxima 7. But you know humans who were, Kix pressed.
You served with some of them.
I served with a lot of people, Garrett said evenly, and most of them were perfectly normal individuals who happened to be good at their jobs. Zara watched this exchange with growing interest. She'd known Garrett for 3 months now, ever since he'd signed on with their crew, and she'd never seen him deflect a question quite so smoothly. Usually he was an open book, the kind of person who'd tell you his life story if you so much as asked how his day was going. See? She said to Kix. Even he knows the stories are nonsense. I didn't say they were nonsense, Garrett corrected. I said the people I served with were normal. Those aren't the same thing. Oh, come on, Zara gestured broadly, nearly knocking over her drink in the process. You're telling me that humans really do have some kind of, what would you call it? Berserker gene? Hidden combat protocols? A secret switch that turns you from friendly neighborhood engineers into unstoppable killing machines? Garrett was quiet for a long moment, staring out the viewport at the stars beyond Kepler Station. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. You know what I think the real difference is? He said. It's not that humans are better fighters than anyone else. Hell, the Kithara are stronger, the Velkari are faster, and the Harvester Queens are basically living weapons. But humans, we're really bad at knowing when to quit. Stubbornness, Zara said. Like Kix said. Not stubbornness. Stubbornness implies we're being unreasonable. I prefer to think of it as selective hearing. Selective hearing? Garrett's grin returned, but there was something sharper about it now. Yeah. Like when someone says this is impossible, we tend to hear this might take a while. When they say you can't win, we hear you haven't won yet. When they say surrender or die, we hear, would you like to see something interesting? Zara blinked all four eyes in sequence. That's actually kind of terrifying when you put it that way. Only if you're on the wrong side of it. Before Zara could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life with Captain Voss's gravelly voice. All hands to stations. We've got a situation developing. And someone find me that human engineer. I want all available power to shields and weapons. Garrett was already moving, his casual demeanor shifting into something more focused. Looks like you might get your answer about human behavior after all, he said over his shoulder as he headed for the door. Zara and Kix exchanged glances, or the closest approximation their species could manage, and followed him toward the bridge. The bridge of the profit margin was a study in controlled chaos. Captain Voss, a grizzled Terran who'd apparently been born with a perpetual scowl, was barking orders at his mixed-species crew, while displays showed the tactical situation around Kepler Station, and it was, by any reasonable definition, completely fucked. Talk to me, Hendricks. Voss growled at his sensor operator, a Nixali whose tail was twitching with nervous energy. 3 ships, Captain. Ravager-class assault vessels, flying Syndicate colors. They jumped in 5 minutes ago and immediately started broadcasting surrender demands to the station. Zara felt her blood chill. The Syndicate wasn't just pirates. They were pirates with delusions of grandeur. They'd been pushing into this sector for months, taking over smaller stations and trade routes, and they had a well-deserved reputation for creative brutality. What do they want? Voss asked. Everything, Hendricks replied. Station cargo, ship manifests, passenger lists. Standard Syndicate operating procedure. They want to know who's worth ransoming and who's worth selling. Lovely. Voss turned to his tactical officer. What have we got for defenses? Lieutenant Kor, a Kithara whose 4 arms were dancing across his console with practiced efficiency, looked up with an expression that was universal across all species. We're screwed. Station's got standard defensive platforms, but they're not military grade. Maybe enough to handle 1 Ravager if they're lucky. The merchant ships docked here are, well, merchants. Nobody's carrying anything heavier than basic point defense systems. What about the station's distress call? Asked Zara. Sent as soon as the Syndicate ships arrived, Hendricks confirmed. But the nearest Imperial patrol is 6 hours out. Even if they burn their drives to the limit, they won't get here for 4 hours. Voss's scowl deepened. And how long before the Syndicate loses patience and starts shooting? Based on previous incidents, maybe 30 minutes. Fantastic. Voss rubbed his temples with the air of a man who'd had entirely too much excitement for one day. Options? We could make a run for it, suggested Kor. The profit margin is fast enough to outrun Ravagers if we get a head start. And leave everyone else to get slaughtered? Voss shook his head. I may be a bastard, but I'm not that kind of bastard. Zara found herself looking at Garrett, who'd taken a position at the engineering console but was staring at the tactical display with an intensity that made her spine tingle. She'd seen that look before, usually right before someone did something spectacularly stupid. Garrett, she said quietly. What are you thinking? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up a schematic of the station's power grid and started running calculations. Captain, he said finally, what if we didn't run? Come again? What if we didn't run? What if we fought? The bridge went quiet except for the hum of electronics and the distant thrum of the ship's drives. Kor was the first to break the silence. Garrett, I respect the sentiment, but we're talking about 3 Ravager-class ships. They've got military-grade weapons, shields, and armor. We're flying a merchant vessel with a crew of 12 and basic defensive systems. I know. Then you know it's suicide. Garrett's smile was back, but there was something predatory about it now. Is it, though? Core, what's the Syndicate's usual tactics? Overwhelming force. They jump in, demand surrender, and if they don't get it, they start shooting until resistance collapses. Why? Because they're bullies, Garrett said simply. And bullies have a weakness. They're not used to people fighting back. Voss leaned back in his captain's chair, studying his engineer with new interest. You have a plan. I have the beginning of a plan. The rest depends on how creative we're feeling. I'm listening. Garrett gestured to the tactical display. The Syndicate ships are holding position about 2,000 kilometers from the station. Standard intimidation range, close enough to make their point, far enough to avoid getting caught in an explosion if someone gets desperate. But look at their formation. Zara looked. The 3 Ravagers were arranged in a loose triangle, with the lead ship slightly ahead of the other 2. It's a classic attack formation, she said. Exactly. They're positioned to support each other, cover each other's blind spots, and deliver maximum firepower if things go wrong. It's textbook perfect, and that's the problem. How is being tactically sound a problem? Asked Core. Because it means they're thinking like a military unit. They're following doctrine, which means they're predictable. And predictable opponents make mistakes. Voss's expression had shifted from skeptical to intrigued. What kind of mistakes? The kind that happen when you're so focused on the big picture that you miss the details. Captain, I need you to trust me on this. Can you get us within 500 kilometers of the lead ship without them shooting us? Maybe. If I broadcast a surrender signal and make it look like we're coming to negotiate. Perfect. Hendricks, I need you to target the station's main power coupling. Core, I need you to prepare a spread of sensor drones. Make them look like escape pods. Garrett, Zara said slowly, what exactly are you planning? His grin was downright feral now. I'm planning to show those Syndicate bastards why humans have a reputation for being stubborn. 20 minutes later, Zara was strapped into her acceleration couch and wondering if she'd lost her mind. The profit margin was moving slowly toward the Syndicate formation, broadcasting standard surrender codes and requesting permission to negotiate. Captain Voss was playing his role perfectly, the defeated merchant captain hoping to buy his way out of trouble. Profit margin, this is Syndicate vessel Bloodhawk, came the response from the lead Ravager. You will approach to within 1 kilometer and prepare for boarding. Any deviation from our instructions will result in immediate destruction. Acknowledged, Bloodhawk, Voss replied, his voice carrying just the right note of resignation. We're carrying a cargo of rare earth minerals and industrial components. I'm sure we can reach an arrangement. Oh, we'll reach an arrangement, the Syndicate captain replied with audible amusement. Whether you like it or not. Zara glanced at Garrett, who was hunched over his console, fingers flying across the controls. Please tell me you know what you're doing, she whispered. I know exactly what I'm doing, he replied without looking up. I'm probably saving all our lives, and I'm definitely about to do something that'll either be remembered as brilliant or get us all killed. Those aren't mutually exclusive. That's the spirit. The profit margin continued its approach, and Zara could see the Syndicate ships growing larger on the display. Ravagers were ugly vessels, all angles and weapon mounts, built for intimidation as much as combat. Each one was easily 3 times the size of their merchant ship, and bristling with enough firepower to level a small city. 500 kilometers and closing, Hendricks reported. Weapons are still powered down, added Core. They're not taking us seriously. Good, Garrett said. That's exactly what we want. Captain, on my mark, I need you to cut engines and let us drift. Make it look like a navigation error. And then? Then we find out if humans really do have a reputation for being crazy. Zara's tail was twitching so hard it was starting to cramp. Garrett, if this goes wrong, we'll all be dead in about 30 seconds, so we won't have time to worry about it, he said cheerfully. But if it goes right, well, let's just say the Syndicate is about to learn why you don't mess with humans. Profit margin, you're drifting off course, came the sharp voice from the Bloodhawk. Correct your trajectory immediately. Sorry, Voss replied, sounding harried. We've got a thruster malfunction. Give us a moment to... Now, Garrett said quietly. Several things happened at once. First, the profit margin's engines cut out completely, leaving them drifting on momentum toward the Syndicate formation. To outside observers, it looked like a catastrophic system failure. Second, a spread of sensor drones launched from their cargo bay, each one painted and configured to look like an escape pod. The Syndicate ships immediately began tracking them, exactly as Garrett had predicted. Third, a precisely aimed communications pulse hit Kepler Station's main power coupling, overloading it in a spectacular display of sparks and secondary explosions. Half the station's lights went out, and emergency klaxons began wailing. And fourth, the part that made Zara's blood turn to ice,
Garrett calmly reached under his console and pulled out what was unmistakably a military-grade combat harness.
"Where the hell did you get that?" she demanded. "I've been in the merchant fleet for 3 years," he replied, strapping on the harness with practiced efficiency. "You pick things up." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting right now." "Captain, we need to be moving in about 10 seconds. The Syndicate response was immediate and predictable. Seeing what appeared to be a station under attack and a merchant ship suffering critical failures, the Bloodhawk moved in closer to investigate, while the other 2 Ravagers adjusted their positions to cover the spreading field of escape pods. "They're taking the bait," Core reported.
"Lead ship is moving to intercept us. The other 2 are spreading out to cover search and rescue."
"Perfect," Garrett said. "Now comes the fun part." He activated his harness, and suddenly his console displays shifted to show something that definitely wasn't standard merchant ship equipment. Weapons systems, targeting computers, and what looked like enough firepower to level a small moon. "Garrett," Voss said slowly, "what the fuck did you do to my ship?" "I upgraded it," he replied, his fingers dancing across controls that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. "Core, I need you to target the Bloodhawk's forward shield generators. Hendricks, as soon as I give the word, I need you to flood all channels with a jamming signal." "This is insane," Zara muttered.
"This is war," Garrett corrected, and for the first time since she'd known him, his voice carried an edge that made her believe every single story she'd ever heard about human combat capabilities.
The Bloodhawk was less than 200 meters away now, close enough that Zara could see the individual weapon mounts on its hull. Close enough that she could see the boarding shuttles launching from its hangar bay. "Profit margin, prepare to be boarded," the Syndicate captain announced. "Resistance will be met with lethal force." "Understood," Voss replied. "We're opening our docking bay now." Except they weren't. Instead, the Profit Margin's hidden weapons systems came online all at once, and Garrett's targeting computer locked onto the Bloodhawk's shield generators with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Now," he said quietly. The next 30 seconds were pure chaos. The Profit Margin opened fire at point-blank range, its hidden weapons tearing through the Bloodhawk's shields like tissue paper. The Syndicate ship, caught completely off guard, tried to return fire, but Garrett was already moving, using the merchant ship's superior maneuverability to stay inside the Ravager's firing arc. "Jamming signal active," Hendricks reported. "They can't coordinate with the other ships." "Good. Core, target their engine pods. Let's see how well they fight when they can't move." The Profit Margin spun on its axis, weapons blazing, and the Bloodhawk's engine section erupted in a spectacular display of fire and debris. The Syndicate ship was now dead in space, its weapons systems struggling to track a target that was moving too fast and too close for their military-grade systems to handle. "This is impossible," Core breathed. "We're a merchant ship. We shouldn't be able to—" "We're not a merchant ship," Garrett said, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "We're a Q ship, and these Syndicate bastards just learned the hard way that humans don't like bullies." A Q ship. Zara felt her understanding of the universe shift slightly. Q-ships were a human invention. Merchant vessels that looked helpless but were actually heavily armed warships designed to lure pirates into ambushes. They were supposed to be a myth, a legend from the early days of human expansion. Apparently, they weren't.
"Bloodhawk is dead in space," Core reported.
"But the other 2 ships are moving to intercept. They'll be in weapons range in 90 seconds. "Then we better move fast," Garrett said. "Captain, I need you to get us to the station's defensive grid. Hendricks, see if you can get the station's power back online." "Already working on it," Hendricks replied. "Power coupling is fried, but I can reroute through the backup systems." The Profit Margin accelerated toward Kepler Station, the 2 remaining Syndicate ships in pursuit. Zara watched the tactical display with growing dread. Even damaged, 2 Ravagers were more than enough to finish them off. "Garrett," she said, "we can't fight 2 of them." "We don't have to fight them," he replied. "We just have to survive long enough for them to make a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that happens when you're so focused on revenge that you forget to think tactically." The pursuing Syndicate ships opened fire, their weapons lighting up space with deadly precision. The Profit Margin jinked and weaved, its shields flaring as energy beams and projectiles struck home. Alarms began wailing throughout the ship. "Shields down to 60%, Core announced. "Hull breaches on decks 3 and 5. "Station power is back online," Hendricks reported. "Defensive platforms are spinning up." "Good. Now we just need to—" The ship lurched as a heavy projectile struck the engineering section, and Garrett's console exploded in a shower of sparks. He was thrown back against his acceleration couch, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "Garrett!" Zara lunged toward him, but his harness was already pulling him back to his feet. "I'm fine," he said, wiping blood from his eyes.
Just need to... Another impact. This one strong enough to crack the bridge's main display.
The profit margin was tough, but it wasn't designed to take this kind of punishment. "Shields down to 30%, Core reported. "We can't take much more of this." Garrett stared at the tactical display, his eyes bright with something that might have been madness or inspiration. "Hendricks, can you get me a direct link to the station's defensive grid?" "Maybe, but it'll take time we don't have." "Then we'll make time. Captain, I need you to do something that's going to sound completely insane." "I'm listening." "I need you to fly directly at the station's main hangar bay. Don't slow down, don't deviate, just fly straight at it like you're planning to ram it. That's suicide. Trust me." Voss stared at his engineer for a long moment, then nodded grimly. "You've been right so far. Core, plot a collision course with the station. Full acceleration. Captain, do it!" The profit margin changed course, accelerating directly toward Kepler Station's massive hangar bay. The pursuing syndicate ships followed, their weapons continuing to hammer at the merchant vessel's failing shields. "Shields down to 15%, Core announced. "Hull integrity is critical. Station defenses are online," Hendricks reported.
"But they're not engaging. They probably think we're making a suicide run."
Garrett's fingers were flying across his backup console, working with desperate efficiency. "Come on, come on." The station loomed ahead of them, its hangar bay growing larger by the second. Zara could see the individual docking clamps and loading mechanisms, close enough to count the rivets in the station's hull. "Garrett, whatever you're planning, you need to do it now," Voss said tightly. "Got it!" Garrett's voice was triumphant. "Hendricks, transmit the signal to the station's defense grid. Tell them to fire on my mark." "What signal?" "Imperial Fleet Authorization Code 77 Alpha, and tell them the targets are the ships pursuing us." Hendricks's hands froze over his console. "Garrett, that's a restricted military code. Only active fleet personnel can—" "I know what it is," Garrett said quietly. "Just send it." The signal went out, and for a moment nothing happened. Then, one by one, Kepler Station's defensive platforms began to track the pursuing syndicate ships. "Profit margin, this is Kepler Station Defense Command," came a crisp voice over the comm. "We show 2 hostile vessels in pursuit. Confirm engagement authorization." "Authorization confirmed," Garrett replied. "Fire at will." The station's weapons opened up in a devastating barrage, catching the 2 syndicate ships completely off guard. The Ravagers, focused entirely on their pursuit of the profit margin, flew directly into the station's firing arc without even attempting evasive maneuvers. The first ship died in seconds, its hull cracking open like an egg. The second managed to turn away, but not before taking critical damage to its weapons and propulsion systems. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" came the voice of the surviving syndicate captain. "We surrender." "Surrender accepted," Voss replied, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "You'll be handed over to Imperial authorities when they arrive." The profit margin finally slowed its mad dash toward the station, its battered hull groaning with the stress of the chase. Emergency lights flickered throughout the bridge, and the smell of burned electronics filled the air. "Well," Voss said into the sudden silence, "that was exciting." Zara looked at Garrett, who was slumped in his acceleration couch, blood still trickling from the cut on his forehead. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. He met her eyes, and for a moment, she saw something there that made her understand why humans had the reputation they did. Not violence, not aggression, but a quiet, implacable determination that suggested he would never, ever give up. "I'm Garrett Reeves," he said simply. "Formerly Lieutenant Commander Garrett Reeves, Imperial Fleet Engineering Corps. And you're right. The stories about humans are mostly propaganda." "Mostly?" His smile was tired but genuine. "The part about us being stubborn? That part's completely true." 2 hours later, Zara found Garrett in the ship's tiny medical bay, getting his forehead stitched up by Dr. Yix, the profit margin's Zenthari medic. The doctor was muttering under her breath about reckless humans and unnecessary heroics, but her 4 hands were gentle as she worked. "So," Zara said, settling into the chair beside his bed, "Imperial Fleet Engineering Corps, huh?" "Retired," Garrett said firmly. "Very retired." "Uh-huh. And the Q-ship modifications?" "Personal project. I like to tinker." "You like to tinker," she repeated. "Right, because nothing says hobby like converting a merchant vessel into a warship." Dr. Yix finished her work and stepped back, examining her handiwork with professional satisfaction. "There. Try not to get shot in the head for at least a week, would you?" "I'll do my best," Garrett promised. The doctor left them alone, and Zara studied Garrett's face in the dim light of the medical bay. Why didn't you tell us? She asked finally. Tell you what? That you're military. That you've done this before. That you're not just some friendly engineer who likes to make terrible jokes. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Because I didn't want to be that person anymore, he said finally. I spent 8 years in the fleet, Zara. 8 years fighting wars that somebody else started, following orders that somebody else gave, watching friends die for causes that somebody else believed in. When my tour was up, I wanted to do something different. Something peaceful. And yet you turned the profit margin into a Q-ship. That was insurance. I hoped I'd never have to use it. But you did use it. And you were good at it. Really good. He looked at her, and she saw that quiet determination again. I told you, humans are stubborn. When someone threatens people we care about, we don't just roll over and accept it. We fight back. People you care about? This crew. This ship. Hell, even Captain Voss, cranky bastard that he is. You're my friends, Zara. And I don't let friends get hurt if I can help it. Zara felt something warm unfurl in her chest. An emotion she didn't have a name for in her own language. Is that what happened at Proxima 7? Friends getting hurt? Garrett's expression darkened. Proxima 7 was different. That was a long time ago. But you were there. I was there. And the stories about what happened? The stories about what happened are classified Imperial Fleet records. I can't talk about them. Can't or won't? Both. Zara leaned back in her chair, processing this. You know, I always thought the human reputation was exaggerated. All those stories about impossible victories and last-minute heroics. I figured they were just propaganda, like you said. They mostly are, Garrett agreed. But the thing about propaganda is that it has to be believable. And the thing about human propaganda is that it's usually based on something that actually happened. So the stories about humans being unstoppable in combat? Humans aren't unstoppable, Garrett said. We're just really, really bad at staying stopped. Before Zara could respond, the intercom crackled to life. All hands, this is the captain. Imperial fleet vessels have arrived and are taking the surviving Syndicate ship into custody. We're cleared to depart Kepler Station within the hour. Oh, and Garrett? Nice work, you magnificent bastard. Garrett grinned, and for a moment, he looked like the friendly engineer she'd known for 3 months. You know what the best part is? He said. What? I don't have to fill out any paperwork. That's Admiral Reeves's problem now. Admiral Reeves? My sister. She's the one who'll be conducting the investigation into today's incident. And she's going to be so pissed when she finds out I was involved. Zara stared at him. Your sister is an admiral? Fleet admiral, actually. Commanding officer of the 7th Fleet. She's the one who'll be asking all the awkward questions about how a simple merchant vessel managed to take out 2 Syndicate Ravagers. And what are you going to tell her? Garrett's grin was absolutely wicked. I'm going to tell her that humans have a reputation for being stubborn, and sometimes that reputation is well-deserved. Later, as the profit margin departed Kepler Station and jumped to hyperspace, Zara found herself on the observation deck again, staring out at the stars. The ship was quiet now, the crew having gone about their normal duties as if they hadn't just fought off 3 pirate vessels. As if they hadn't just witnessed something that would probably become another one of those stories. Penny for your thoughts? Garrett said, joining her at the viewport. Is that a human expression? Yep. Means I'm curious about what you're thinking. Zara was quiet for a moment. I'm thinking about stories, she said finally. About how they spread, and why some of them stick around longer than others. And I'm thinking that maybe the human stories stick around because they're not really about humans at all. They're about the idea that sometimes, when everything goes wrong, and the odds are impossible, and any reasonable person would give up, sometimes someone doesn't. Garrett nodded slowly. Sometimes someone decides that impossible just means hasn't been done yet. And sometimes, Zara added, someone decides that the right thing to do is more important than the smart thing to do. Now you're getting it. She looked at him, this human who'd hidden his true nature behind terrible jokes and friendly smiles, who'd turned a merchant vessel into a warship just in case, who'd risked everything to protect people he'd known for 3 months. The stories about humans, she said. They're not about being superhuman or unstoppable or magically superior to everyone else. No. They're about being human. About refusing to give up, even when giving up would be easier. About protecting people you care about, even when the cost is too high. About doing what's right, even when it's stupid. Garrett smiled. That might be the most insightful thing anyone's ever said about my species. I'm a quick learner. That you are. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars slide past. Finally, Zara spoke again. Garrett? Yeah? Next time you decide to do something heroically stupid, could you maybe give the rest of us a little more warning? I'll consider it. And maybe explain the plan in more detail, because trust me isn't really a plan. It worked, didn't it? This time, he agreed. But you know what? I don't think there's going to be a next time. At least not like this. What makes you say that? Garrett gestured toward the stars beyond the viewport. Word's going to spread about what happened at Kepler Station. The Syndicate lost 3 ships to what they thought was a helpless merchant vessel. That's the kind of story that gets told in every port, every station, every cantina from here to the rim. And pirates are bullies, Zara. They pick on targets they think are weak. When word gets out that merchant ships might not be as helpless as they seem, he shrugged. Let's just say I think the Syndicate is going to be a lot more careful about who they try to intimidate. Zara considered this. So you're saying that one fight might prevent dozens of others? That's the theory. Sometimes the best way to avoid a war is to win the first battle so decisively that nobody wants to fight the second one. Is that human philosophy? That's practical philosophy. Though I suppose humans do have a talent for turning practical solutions into dramatic gestures. Zara laughed, a sound like silver bells in a gentle breeze. You mean like converting a merchant ship into a Q ship just in case? Exactly like that. The ship's intercom crackled again, this time with the voice of Lieutenant Core. Garrett, could you come to the bridge? We're getting some unusual readings from the hyperspace motivator. Garrett sighed. Duty calls. The glamorous life of a ship's engineer. One day you're fighting pirates, the next day you're crawling through maintenance tubes looking for loose connections. Such is life, Zara agreed. But Garrett? Yeah? Thank you. For today, I mean. For keeping us all alive. He paused in the doorway, looking back at her with that gentle smile she'd grown to associate with the man she'd thought she'd known. That's what friends do, Zara. They look out for each other. After he left, Zara remained at the viewport, thinking about stories and reputations and the strange species called humanity. She'd always prided herself on being rational, logical, skeptical of wild tales and improbable legends. But today she'd seen something that made her reconsider. Not magic, not superhuman abilities, not divine intervention. Just a man who'd decided that protecting his friends was more important than protecting himself, and who'd had the skill and determination to make that decision stick. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what all the stories were really about. Not that humans were invincible, but that they had a disturbing tendency to act like they were, especially when people they cared about were in danger. She thought about Kix's cousin Trix, who'd served on a human ship and claimed they had something called spite, that was basically a renewable energy source. She'd dismissed it as obvious exaggeration at the time. Now she wasn't so sure. She'd seen the look in Garrett's eyes when he'd realized what the Syndicate intended to do to Kepler Station. She'd heard the edge in his voice when he'd started planning their counterattack. If that wasn't spite being converted into kinetic energy, she didn't know what was. Her tail twitched with amusement. The next time someone told her a story about humans doing something impossible, she might actually listen. 3 days later, the profit margin dropped out of hyperspace at Tau Cygni Station, their next scheduled stop on the trade route. Zara was in the cargo bay doing inventory when Kix found her. You're not going to believe what I just heard, he said, his crystalline form practically vibrating with excitement. Let me guess, Zara said without looking up from her datapad. Someone's telling stories about what happened at Kepler Station. Not just someone. Everyone. The story's all over the sector communications network. They're calling it the Kepler Station incident, and the details get more outrageous with every telling. Such as? Well, the basic facts are accurate. 3 Syndicate ships, 1 Q ship, spectacular victory for the good guys. But according to some versions, the profit margin single-handedly destroyed all 3 Ravagers in less than 30 seconds. Zara snorted. Ridiculous. According to another version, the human engineer disabled the Syndicate ships using nothing but harsh language and a really stern expression. That's even more ridiculous. And according to the version I heard in the communications center 10 minutes ago, the entire thing was planned from the beginning. The profit margin deliberately allowed itself to be trapped at Kepler Station in order to lure the Syndicate into an ambush. That's... Zara paused, thinking about Garrett's modifications to the ship, his knowledge of Syndicate tactics, the way he'd seemed almost eager for the confrontation. Actually, that one might not be entirely wrong. Kix's harmonic voice shifted to a higher pitch. Surprise. You think Garrett planned it? I think Garrett's a lot more complicated than any of us realized. And I think humans in general are more complicated than their reputation suggests. Meaning? Meaning the stories about them aren't wrong, exactly. They're just incomplete. They focus on the dramatic parts, the impossible victories, the last-minute heroics, the refusing to surrender against hopeless odds. But they miss the boring parts that make those dramatic parts possible. Such as? Zara gestured around the cargo bay, which looked perfectly normal except for the subtle modifications she'd started noticing. Reinforced bulkheads, hidden equipment lockers, what looked suspiciously like concealed weapon mounts. Such as spending 3 years methodically converting a merchant vessel into a warship just in case. Such as studying enemy tactics and psychological profiles. Such as building relationships with your crew so that when the crisis comes, everyone trusts you enough to follow your orders without question. Kix was quiet for a moment, processing this. So you're saying the stories are true, but they're missing the preparation? I'm saying the stories make it sound like humans win through luck or magic or divine intervention. But what I saw at Kepler Station wasn't luck. It was a man who'd spent years preparing for a fight he hoped would never come, and when it finally did, he was ready. That's... Kix paused, his crystalline structure shifting to a deeper blue. That's actually more impressive than the stories make it sound. Is it? Think about it. Anyone can be brave in the moment, adrenaline, desperation, whatever. But spending years preparing for a crisis that might never happen? That takes a different kind of courage. Zara nodded slowly. The courage to hope for the best while preparing for the worst. And the wisdom to know the difference. They worked in companionable silence for a while, cataloging cargo and updating manifests. Finally, Kix spoke again. So what happens now? With Garrett, I mean, and with us. What do you mean? I mean, he's not really just an engineer, is he? He's a former fleet officer with enough knowledge and connections to pull off something like the Kepler Station incident. Doesn't that change things? Zara considered this. Does it? Well, doesn't it? Kix, 3 days ago, did you trust Garrett? Of course. Did you consider him a friend? Absolutely. Has he treated any of us differently since Kepler Station? No, but then what's changed, really? So he used to be military. So he has skills we didn't know about. So he's more prepared for trouble than we thought. Does any of that change who he is as a person? Kix was quiet for a long moment. I suppose not, he said finally. But it does make me wonder what other surprises the crew might be hiding. Oh, that's easy, said a voice from the cargo bay entrance. They turned to see Dr. Yix standing in the doorway, her forearms carrying what looked like medical supplies. Captain Voss used to be Imperial Intelligence. Hendricks is a former communications specialist with the Border Patrol. Kor's family are hereditary weapons masters on Cathara Prime. And I used to run a field hospital in the Frontier Wars. Zara and Kix stared at her. You're kidding, Zara said finally. Not even a little bit. Why do you think we're all working on a merchant vessel in the outer sectors? We're all running from something. Our pasts, our reputations, our responsibilities. The difference is, when trouble found us, we remembered who we used to be. But you're all so normal, Kix protested. Dr. Yix's laugh was like the sound of wind through crystal formations. Normal is relative, Kix. And sometimes the most normal thing you can do is stand up and fight when someone threatens your friends. She left them to their inventory, and Zara found herself laughing despite everything. You know what the really funny part is? She said to Kix. What? I came out here to get away from all the stories and legends and dramatic nonsense. I wanted a quiet life on a simple merchant vessel with a boring crew. And instead? Instead, I found myself in the middle of one of those stories. And the worst part is, I actually enjoyed it. Enjoyed almost getting killed. Enjoyed mattering. Enjoyed being part of something important. Enjoyed discovering that when push came to shove, I was braver than I thought I was. Kix's harmonic voice carried a note of understanding. You're thinking about staying, aren't you? Even though you know this crew is going to find trouble wherever we go. I'm thinking that maybe trouble isn't always a bad thing. Maybe sometimes trouble finds you because you're in a position to do something about it. And maybe that's not the worst fate in the galaxy. And if we run into the Syndicate again, or some other group of pirates who've heard the stories and want to test themselves against the legendary Q-ship profit margin, Zara's tail twitched with something that might have been anticipation. Then I guess we'll find out if lightning can strike twice. That's a human expression, isn't it? Probably. I've been picking up a lot of human expressions lately. They finished their inventory in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, Tau Cygni Station bustled with activity. Merchants, travelers, freight haulers, all the normal commerce of interstellar civilization. It looked peaceful, routine, ordinary. But Zara had learned something in the past few days. Ordinary was a luxury that someone had to fight to preserve. And sometimes the people doing that fighting were hiding in plain sight. disguised as simple merchants with boring jobs and normal lives. The stories about humans weren't propaganda after all. They were recruitment posters, advertisements for a way of life that said, when the darkness comes, we'll be the ones standing in its way. And despite herself, despite her desire for a quiet life, Zara found herself wanting to be part of that story. That evening, the crew gathered in the ship's common area for what Captain Voss generously called recreational activities, and everyone else called getting drunk and playing cards. It was a tradition that had started shortly after Zara joined the crew, and had become one of her favorite parts of their routine. Tonight felt different, though. There was an undercurrent of energy in the room, a sense of shared experience that hadn't been there before. They'd been through something together, seen each other at their best when things were at their worst. It had changed them, individually and as a group. So, Captain Voss said, dealing cards with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been gambling longer than most species had been spacefaring. I suppose we should talk about what happens next. Next? Asked Hendricks. Next, Voss confirmed, because like it or not, we're not anonymous anymore. Word about Kepler Station is spreading faster than a hull breach, and everyone from here to the core worlds is going to know about the Q-ship profit margin within a month. Dr. Yix picked up her cards and arranged them with clinical precision. And that's a problem because Q-ships work by being invisible. The whole point is that nobody knows what you are until it's too late. Now that our secret's out, Voss shrugged. We're just another armed merchant vessel. Dangerous, maybe, but not surprising. Garrett looked up from his own cards. Actually, I think we might be missing the bigger picture here. How so? The stories about Kepler Station aren't just spreading, they're evolving. And the version that's becoming most popular isn't about a Q-ship at all. It's about a crew that refused to abandon innocent people when they could have run. Core's forearms paused in their card sorting. Meaning our reputation isn't based on our weapons or our tactics or our ship modifications. It's based on the fact that when push came to shove, we chose to fight instead of flee. And that's a reputation that's a lot harder to counter with bigger guns or better armor. Zara studied her cards without really seeing them. You're saying we've become a symbol. I'm saying we've become proof that sometimes the good guys win. And in a galaxy where the Syndicate and groups like them are spreading like a plague, that might be more valuable than any weapon. So what are you suggesting? Asked Voss. I'm suggesting we keep doing what we're doing. We run our normal trade routes, we handle our normal business, and if pirates or slavers or other scum decide to test themselves against us... Garrett's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Well, we give them an education. You want to turn us into some kind of vigilante operation, Doctor? Yix asked. I want to turn us into exactly what we've always been. A merchant crew that looks out for each other and doesn't back down from bullies. The only difference is that now people know we're capable of backing up our principles with action. Voss set down his cards and leaned back in his chair. You know what the scary part is? I think you might be right. The galaxy's been getting darker these past few years. More pirates, more slavers, more groups like the Syndicate who think might makes right. Maybe it's time someone reminded them that might isn't the only thing that matters. So we're really doing this? Asked Hendricks. We're really going to keep flying into trouble instead of away from it? We're going to keep flying our regular routes, Voss corrected. If trouble finds us, well, that's what friends are for. Zara looked around the table at these people, these former soldiers and spies and medical officers who'd chosen to spend their retirement hauling cargo and playing cards. A few days ago she would have said they were running from their pasts. Now she realized they'd been preparing for their future. All right, she said, laying down her cards. I'm in. In for what? Asked Kix. In for whatever comes next. Stories, legends, dramatic gestures and all. Because you know what I've learned about humans in the past few days? What's that? Asked Garrett. The stories about you aren't exaggerated. They're just incomplete. They tell us about the victories and the heroics, but they don't tell us about the part that really matters. Which is? Zara's smile was bright enough to light up the room. The part where you decide that some things are worth fighting for, no matter what the odds. And then you find other people who feel the same way. She gestured around the table. People like this crew. People who'll stand with you when the shooting starts. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Because they've decided that their friends are worth more than their safety. And that, added Captain Voss, is how legends really get started. Outside the profit margin, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of the beings who traveled between them. But somewhere in the ship's common area, over cards and conversation, a new story was beginning. Not about superhuman heroes or impossible victories, but about ordinary people who decided to be extraordinary when it mattered most. And in a galaxy that was growing darker by the day, that might just be the most important story of all. Epilogue, 8 months later. The cantina on Nexus Prime was the kind of place where stories went to grow legs and learn to run. Spacers from across the sector gathered here to trade gossip, rumors, and increasingly elaborate tales of adventure and heroism. Tonight was no different, except for the quality of the audience. "I'm telling you, it's all true," insisted a grizzled freighter captain, whose scars suggested he'd seen more action than most military veterans. "I was there when they took down the Syndicate fleet at Kepler Station. One merchant ship against 3 Ravagers, and they made it look easy." "Come off it," scoffed another spacer. "One ship can't take 3 Ravagers. The physics don't work." "Physics got nothing to do with it when you're dealing with humans," the first captain replied. "They've got this thing they do. They just refuse to accept that they're supposed to lose." At a corner table, mostly hidden in shadow, Zara listened to the conversation with amusement. The story had grown in the telling naturally. Now the profit margin was supposedly a purpose-built warship instead of a converted merchant vessel. Garrett had become some kind of tactical genius instead of a former fleet engineer with good instincts and better luck. And the crew had become a legendary band of heroes instead of a group of friends who'd simply refused to let other friends get hurt. "Excuse me," said a voice beside her table. She looked up to see a young Kithara, barely out of adolescence, clutching a data pad with nervous energy. "You're Zara Veltar, aren't you? From the profit margin?" Zara sighed inwardly. This had been happening more and more lately. Young beings seeking them out, wanting to join their crew or hear their stories or simply touch something connected to the growing legend. "I might be," she said carefully. "Why?" "I'm writing a thesis on human military psychology for the Galactic University," the young Kithara explained eagerly. "I was hoping I could interview you about your experiences serving with human personnel." "I don't serve with human personnel," Zara corrected. "I work with human friends." "There's a difference." "Oh, of course, sorry. Could I interview you about working with human friends?" Despite herself, Zara found herself smiling. "What do you want to know?" The student activated her data pad and leaned forward intently. "Well, everyone knows humans have this reputation for being unstoppable in combat situations. But what I'm trying to understand is why. What makes them different from other species?" Zara considered this. It was a question she'd been asked dozens of times in the past 8 months, and she'd never quite figured out how to answer it properly. "Can I tell you a secret?" she said finally. "Of course. Humans aren't unstoppable in combat situations. They're not even particularly good at combat, compared to some species. What they're good at is deciding that they're not going to stop, and then finding ways to make that decision stick." The student looked confused. "I don't understand the difference." "The difference is preparation. Humans don't win because they're stronger or faster or more naturally gifted. They win because they spend years preparing for fights they hope they'll never have to have. And when those fights come, they're ready." "But the stories about human berserkers are mostly nonsense," Zara interrupted gently. "I've seen humans in combat, and they're not mindless berserkers. They're methodical, careful, and surprisingly creative. They just happen to be very, very persistent." "Persistent?" "My friend Garrett once told me that humans have selective hearing. When someone says this is impossible, they hear this might take a while. When someone says you can't win, they hear you haven't won yet. And when someone says surrender or die, they hear, would you like to see something interesting?" The student was scribbling notes frantically. "And you think this psychological trait is what gives humans their reputation?" "I think humans earned their reputation the same way every species earns their reputation. By being consistently themselves. And what humans consistently are is stubborn, loyal, and remarkably persistent." "Stubborn, loyal, and remarkably persistent," the student repeated. "That's your analysis of human military psychology?" "That's my analysis of human psychology in general. The military part is just an application." Before the student could ask another question, a familiar voice called out from across the cantina. "Zara, there you are. We've been looking all over for you." She turned to see Garrett approaching, followed by the rest of the Profit Margin's crew. They looked relaxed, happy, like people enjoying a well-deserved shore leave. Which they were, technically, though Zara suspected they'd be shipping out soon. They always did when things got too quiet. "Sorry," she said, standing up. "Lost track of time." "No problem. We're heading back to the ship. Got word about a potential cargo run to the Frontier Systems." "The Frontier Systems?" Zara raised an eyebrow. "That's pirate territory." "Exactly," Garrett said with that familiar sharp smile. "Should be interesting." The young student was staring at them with wide eyes, probably recognizing the rest of the crew from her research. Zara took pity on her. "If you want to understand humans," she said, "here's my advice. Don't focus on the stories about them being unstoppable. Focus on the stories about them not stopping. The difference matters. She followed her friends toward the cantina's exit, leaving the student to her notes and her theories. Behind them, the conversation about the Kepler station incident continued, the details growing more elaborate with each telling. "What were you talking to that kid about?" Garrett asked as they walked through Nexus Prime's crowded corridors. "Human psychology. She wanted to know what makes your species so dangerous in combat." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth. That you're not dangerous because you're good at fighting. You're dangerous because you're bad at giving up." Garrett laughed. "I like that. Mind if I steal it?" "It's yours." "But Garrett?" "Yeah? Next time we go looking for trouble in the frontier systems, could you maybe warn me first? Just so I can update my will. Where's the fun in that?" As they boarded the profit margin and prepared for another journey into the unknown, Zara reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She'd joined this crew looking for a quiet life away from drama and excitement. Instead, she'd found herself in the middle of one of those stories that would be told in cantinas for generations to come. And the strangest part was, she wouldn't trade it for anything. Because the stories were right about one thing. Humans really were something special. Not because they were superhuman or invincible or blessed by the gods, but because they had this remarkable ability to look at impossible situations and decide that impossible just meant they hadn't figured out the solution yet. And if you were lucky enough to call a human your friend, well, that made you part of the story too. The profit margin lifted off from Nexus Prime that evening, bound for the frontier systems and whatever adventures awaited them there. In the ship's common area, the crew played cards and told jokes and planned for a future that would probably be more exciting than any of them really wanted. But they'd face it together, and in the end, that was what mattered most. After all, that's what friends do, and... "So, let me get this straight." Lieutenant Commander Alex Foster leaned back in his chair, boots propped up on the conference table despite the glares from Admiral Henderson. "You've traveled 17 light years to offer us... protection?" The alien ambassador, who had introduced himself as High Emissary Zektal of the Galactic Concordat, twitched his eye stalks in what the human delegation had come to recognize as mild annoyance. His exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the United Nations Security Council chamber, currently repurposed for humanity's first official diplomatic meeting with extraterrestrial life. "As I have explained 3 times already, Lieutenant Commander," Zektal's voice resonated through the translator device, "the Concordat has observed your species' technological advancement with great interest. Your transition from atmospheric to near-orbital capability occurred remarkably quickly. We offer protection as a courtesy to developing worlds." Foster snorted. "Yeah, that's the part I'm having trouble with. Protection from who exactly?" The 7-foot-tall mantis-like being stiffened, all 4 of his secondary limbs twitching in unison. Behind him, the 3 other alien representatives exchanged glances with their compound eyes. "I don't understand the question," Zektal finally replied. Admiral Henderson shot Foster a warning look, but the lieutenant commander had never been particularly good at taking hints. It was why, despite his brilliance as a tactical officer, he remained a lieutenant commander at 38. "It's pretty simple," Foster continued, leaning forward now, elbows on the table. "You're offering protection. That implies there's something to be protected from. So, who's the bad guy here?" "Who are we supposed to be afraid of?" "Alex," Henderson hissed. "Diplomatic protocol." "No, it's a fair question," interrupted Dr. Eliza Warner, the xenobiologist who'd been studying the alien delegation since their arrival 3 days ago. "High Emissary, the Lieutenant Commander is simply trying to understand the nature of the threat. Is there another coalition or species we should be concerned about?" Zakatal's eye stalks swiveled toward his companions again, and the smallest of the group, a vaguely cephalopod-like creature with luminescent skin patterns, floated forward. "There is no specific threat," the new alien spoke, its skin flashing in patterns that seemed to complement its words. "The protection is general, a standard arrangement. Your species receives guidance, cultural integration, technological regulation, and in exchange, you contribute resources proportional to your world's capabilities." Foster laughed out loud this time. "Oh my god, it's a protection racket. You're literally space mobsters." "Alex!" Henderson slammed his palm on the table. "What? Am I wrong?" Foster gestured at the aliens. "They show up, offer protection from non-specific threats, and expect us to pay them in resources. Tell me how that's different from some guy in a pinstriped suit saying, 'Nice planet you got here. Be a shame if something happened to it.'" The luminescent alien's skin rippled with rapid color changes. "Your characterization is both inaccurate and offensive, Lieutenant Commander. The Concordat has overseen the peaceful development of 17 species. We merely overseen their development, Foster interrupted. Interesting choice of words. So you're not equals then? You're what, their babysitters? Their handlers? Zikatal clicked his mandibles, a sound the translators didn't convert, but which Foster was pretty sure signified irritation. We are their protectors, their guides, their masters, Foster concluded. The tension in the room thickened. Henderson looked ready to physically remove Foster from the chamber. The UN Secretary General, who had been silently observing, finally cleared her throat. Perhaps we should take a brief recess, she suggested diplomatically. Our first contact protocol recommends regular breaks to process new information and cultural perspectives. As the delegates began to rise, Foster remained seated, eyes locked with Zektal's compound gaze. Just one more question, he said, ignoring Henderson's hand on his shoulder. These 17 other species you've protected, did any of them ever say no? Zektal's mandibles clicked again, more rapidly this time. That would be unprecedented, Foster smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Well, High Emissary, I think you're about to experience something unprecedented. You're an idiot, Foster, Henderson growled as they walked briskly down the hallway toward the secure briefing room. You nearly caused an interplanetary incident back there. Oh, please. Foster rolled his eyes. If these guys declare war over a few pointed questions, they weren't here for peaceful relations anyway. Dr. Warner hurried alongside them, tablet in hand. He's not entirely wrong, Admiral. Their body language, if we can call it that, showed distinct signs of discomfort when pressed about specifics. The luminescent one, Nexvath, exhibited stress patterns similar to those I observed when we discussed our military capabilities yesterday. See? Foster gestured triumphantly. Eliza gets it. That's Dr. Warner to you, she corrected, though there was no real annoyance in her voice. And I'm not saying your cowboy diplomacy was the right approach, just that your suspicions might have merit. The secure briefing room was already filled with military officials, scientists, and political leaders from around the world. The UN Secretary General nodded to them as they entered. Well, Lieutenant Commander, she said, you've certainly made an impression. The question is whether it's the impression we wanted to make during humanity's first diplomatic exchange with extraterrestrial intelligence. Foster shrugged unapologetically. With all due respect, Madam Secretary, I don't think they're here for diplomacy. They're here to colonize us, just with extra steps. That's a serious accusation, said General Volkov of the Russian Federation. What evidence do you have? Pattern recognition, Foster replied, dropping into a chair. They show up unannounced in our orbit with technology centuries beyond ours. They immediately offer protection without specifying threats. They talk about overseeing development and technological regulation. And apparently, no one has ever turned them down before. It all reads like Colonization 101 to me. Dr. Warner activated the main display showing analysis of the alien physiology and technology. Their ships are impressive, fusion-powered, capable of near-light travel through what appears to be some form of space-folding technology. Their weapons systems, while mostly dormant, include particle beams and something our sensors can't quite identify. So they could wipe us out if they wanted to, said the Chinese representative. Probably, Warner admitted. But that's not their MO. From what we've gathered, the Concordat prefers absorption to annihilation. They protect species by gradually integrating them into their hierarchy, always in subordinate positions. Classic empire building, Foster added. Why destroy a potential resource when you can exploit it instead? Henderson frowned. Even if you're right, what's your point? We can't exactly tell them to take a hike. You've seen their technology. Foster leaned forward, a gleam in his eye that those who knew him recognized all too well. Actually, that's exactly what I think we should do. The room erupted in protests and questions. The Secretary General raised her hand for silence. Explain your reasoning, Lieutenant Commander. It's simple, Foster said. They're not conquerors, they're con artists. Their whole approach relies on intimidation and the perception of overwhelming force. But here's the thing, if they were going to destroy us for non-compliance, why bother with the diplomatic show? Why not just demand our surrender? Perhaps they're genuinely peaceful, suggested the Indian representative. Or perhaps, Foster countered, they're not nearly as powerful as they want us to believe. Did anyone else notice how careful they've been to limit our scans of their technology? How vague they are about the actual size of this Concordat? Dr. Warner nodded slowly. He has a point. They've been remarkably secretive for a supposedly benevolent advanced civilization. So what are you suggesting? Henderson asked, his tone making it clear he already knew and didn't like the answer. Foster grinned. I'm suggesting we call their bluff. When the diplomatic session reconvened, the atmosphere had changed. The human delegation had rearranged themselves, with Foster now seated front and center alongside the Secretary General. The alien representatives noticed the shift immediately. Before we continue, Zekatal began, I must express concern about the confrontational tone of our earlier exchange. The Concordat approaches all developing worlds with respect and— Yeah, about that, Foster interrupted, ignoring Henderson's pained expression. We've been discussing your generous offer, and we've decided to decline. The translator device went silent for a moment, as if struggling to process the statement. Zektal's eye stalks froze in position. I don't understand, the alien finally said. The protection arrangement is standard for all species reaching your level of development. Right. And as I asked earlier, protection from what? Foster leaned back casually. In the absence of a specific threat, Earth will continue to protect itself, as it has done for the past few million years. The luminescent alien, Anx Voth, floated forward again, skin pulsing with rapid color changes. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. The arrangement is not optional. It is the established protocol for integration into the galactic community. Ah, Foster nodded sagely. So we're not being offered protection, we're being offered an ultimatum. Accept your guidance, or what exactly? The third alien, a massive ridge-backed creature who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. Its voice rumbled through the translator like distant thunder. The consequences of rejection would be regrettable. Isolated species often fall prey to resource depletion, internal conflict, or worse. Threats now? Foster raised an eyebrow. Not very diplomatic of you. Not threats, Zakatal insisted, mandibles clicking rapidly. Warnings, based on historical precedent. The Concordat's protection has preserved countless civilizations. And how many has it subjugated? Foster asked pointedly. The Secretary General placed a gentle hand on Foster's arm before addressing the aliens herself. What the Lieutenant Commander is trying to express, perhaps inelegantly, is that humanity values its independence. While we appreciate your offer, we would prefer to forge our own path forward. That is not possible, Zekatal stated flatly. Sure it is, Foster countered. We say no thanks, you get back in your fancy ships and we all go our separate ways. Simple. The fourth alien, who hadn't spoken before, suddenly emitted a series of high-pitched sounds that the translator struggled with momentarily. 17 cycles of exploration, it eventually translated. And never have we encountered such obstinance. The arrangement is not negotiable. The High Council has designated Earth as a protectorate. It is done. Foster smiled thinly. Is it though? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you made an offer, and we declined. That's generally how negotiations work. You misunderstand your position. Zekatal's voice had taken on a harder edge. Your technology is primitive. Your defense is inadequate. Your civilization fragmented. You need our guidance to survive. See, now we're getting to the real talk. Foster nodded appreciatively. So let me be equally clear. Earth isn't interested in becoming your newest protectorate, vassal state, or whatever euphemism you want to use. We're declining your offer. Permanently. The aliens conferred among themselves in a series of clicks, whistles, and light patterns that the translators couldn't or wouldn't convert. When they turned back to the human delegation, Zekatal's posture had changed subtly. This is unfortunate, he said. We had hoped for cooperation. The alternative is less pleasant for all involved. Foster leaned forward. And what alternative would that be exactly? Are you threatening military action against Earth? The Concordat does not engage in warfare, Zekatal replied stiffly. We merely enforce compliance when necessary. Ah, I see the distinction. Foster nodded with exaggerated understanding. You don't wage war, you just enforce compliance with your weapons. Totally different. The Secretary General shot him a warning glance before addressing the aliens again. What the Lieutenant Commander means is that threats will not persuade us. If the Concordat truly values peaceful relations, perhaps we could discuss a different form of alliance, one based on mutual respect rather than protection. There is no alternative arrangement, Zekatal stated firmly. The protocols are fixed. Then I guess we're at an impasse, Foster concluded. Because Earth will not submit to your protection. The ridged alien stepped forward again. You will reconsider when our enforcement fleet arrives. A hush fell over the human delegation. Foster exchanged glances with Dr. Warner, who subtly nodded. Enforcement fleet? Foster repeated innocently. I thought you said the Concordat doesn't engage in warfare. It is not warfare, Zekatal insisted. It is corrective action. Right, Foster nodded slowly. And how many ships would this corrective action involve? The aliens hesitated, clearly reluctant to provide specifics. That is not relevant to these discussions. Nexvoth finally responded, skin flashing in patterns that Dr. Warner had previously identified as indicating stress. I think it's extremely relevant, Foster pressed. If you're threatening us with military force, we should at least know what we're up against. Unless you don't actually have an enforcement fleet? Zikatal's mandibles clicked rapidly in what was becoming a familiar sign of agitation. The Concordat's resources are vast. The enforcement fleet includes dozens of vessels, each capable of neutralizing your entire planetary defense system. Dozens? Foster repeated, sounding almost disappointed. Not hundreds, not thousands. Dozens are more than sufficient for a world at your technological level. The ridged alien growled. Foster laughed. You know what? I think you're bluffing. I think the mighty Concordat isn't nearly as mighty as you want us to believe. The Secretary General cleared her throat loudly. Lieutenant Commander, perhaps we should— No, let's be clear about this. Foster continued, rising to his feet. These protectors show up with 4 representatives in a single ship, make vague threats about an enforcement fleet that might not even exist, and expect us to just hand over our planet's resources because they say so? I'm not buying it. Zekatal rose to his full height, towering over Foster. You test the limits of diplomatic courtesy, human. And you test the limits of our patience, alien, Foster retorted. So let me make this simple. Earth rejects your offer of protection. We're not interested in becoming the 18th species in your collection. If you want our resources, you'll have to take them by force, and I don't think you can. The tension in the room was palpable. The Secretary General looked like she was considering having Foster removed, but curiosity about the alien's response kept her silent. After what seemed like an eternity, Zikatal spoke again, his voice unnervingly calm. Very well. You have made your choice. We will depart and report your decision to the High Council. They will determine the appropriate response. We'll be waiting, Foster said, with a confidence he hoped didn't sound as hollow as it suddenly felt. Are you out of your damn mind? Henderson exploded once they were back in the secure briefing room. You just dared an advanced alien species to attack Earth. Foster collapsed into a chair, the bravado he'd displayed during the confrontation giving way to exhaustion. They were going to anyway, Admiral. At least now we know where we stand. Do we? The Secretary General asked. Because from my perspective, Lieutenant Commander, you've potentially doomed humanity based on a hunch. Not just a hunch, Dr. Warner interjected, displaying new data on the main screen. While Foster was playing poker with our planetary future, I was running deeper scans on their vessel during the exchange. The screen showed detailed readings of the alien ship's energy output, structural composition, and weapon systems. Their technology is advanced, certainly, Warner continued, but not as overwhelming as they implied. Their ship is running at near maximum capacity, just maintaining their life support systems and artificial gravity. The weapon systems are impressive but limited. They couldn't neutralize our entire planetary defense system as claimed. So they were bluffing about their capabilities, General Volkov noted. Partially, Warner agreed. Their technology is genuinely beyond ours in many respects, but the scale of their operations appears to be much smaller than they suggested. And there's something else. She brought up a new set of readings. Their communication systems have been active since they arrived, but not in the way you'd expect from representatives of a vast galactic empire. They've sent exactly 1 transmission, shortly after Foster's initial confrontation, and it was highly compressed, as if they were trying to minimize its detectability. They're afraid, Foster said, the realization dawning on him. They're not the advance team of some massive alien armada. They're freelancers, operating on the fringes. That's speculation, Henderson cautioned. But it fits the evidence, Warner insisted. A genuine enforcement fleet wouldn't need to be summoned. It would already be nearby, monitoring the interaction. And their ship doesn't have the fuel reserves for a long-distance journey back to some central authority. The Chinese representative leaned forward. So what exactly are we dealing with? Pirates? Scam artists? More like opportunistic empire builders, Foster suggested. I'm betting they do this routinely. Find developing worlds, intimidate them with advanced technology, extract resources under the guise of protection, and move on. And if a world refuses? The Indian representative asked. Foster shrugged. If they have the firepower to force compliance, they probably use it. If not, they likely cut their losses and find an easier target. Which category does Earth fall into? Henderson asked grimly. That, Foster admitted, is the million-dollar question. 3 days passed with no sign of the alien ship departing.
It maintained its position in high orbit, occasionally adjusting its trajectory, but making no move to leave Earth's gravitational influence. "They're stalling," Foster concluded during the morning briefing. "Waiting for reinforcements or trying to intimidate us into reconsidering. Or preparing an attack," General Volkov suggested. Dr. Warner shook her head. "Their energy signature doesn't indicate weapons charging. They're just waiting." The Secretary General sighed. "Lieutenant Commander, since your approach got us into this situation, what do you suggest we do now?" Foster had been asking himself the same question for 3 sleepless nights. "I think we need to press our advantage." "What advantage?" Henderson scoffed. "They still have technology far beyond ours." "Yes, but they're isolated and potentially vulnerable," Foster pointed out. "And they've shown their hand. They rely on intimidation because they lack the resources for direct confrontation." "So what's your brilliant plan?" Henderson asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Foster smiled. "I think it's time we introduce the Concordat to an old human tradition, the counter-bluff." The transmission was sent directly to the alien vessel, requesting a final meeting before their departure. To Foster's mild surprise, they agreed. This time, however, the meeting would take place via holographic interface rather than in person, a security precaution both sides seemed to prefer. When the aliens' images materialized in the UN chamber, Foster noted that only Zakatal and Nexvoth were present. The ridged alien and the 4th, more silent member of their delegation were conspicuously absent. "High Emissary," the Secretary General greeted formally. "We appreciate your willingness to speak with us again." Zekatal's eye stalks twitched slightly. "The Concordat values communication, even in disagreement. Have you reconsidered your position?" "Actually," Foster interjected before the Secretary General could respond, "we were hoping you might have reconsidered yours." Nexvoth's skin flashed with what Warner had identified as the equivalent of incredulous laughter. "Your arrogance is remarkable for a species so technologically primitive." "About that," Foster said casually, activating a display of his own. "We've been doing some scanning of our own over the past few days. Interesting readings from your ship." The display showed detailed schematics of the alien vessel, highlighting specific systems and energy outputs. Foster had no idea if the aliens could read human technical displays, but their sudden stillness suggested they understood enough. "Your privacy protocols are impressive," Foster continued, "but not quite advanced enough to hide the fact that your main propulsion system is operating at 27% efficiency, or that your weapons systems, while formidable, have only enough energy reserves for approximately 12 minutes of sustained fire, or that you've been desperately trying to repair a quantum communication array that, based on our analysis, was damaged long before you reached Earth." Zekatal's mandibles clicked rapidly. "These readings are inaccurate." "Are they?" Foster raised an eyebrow. "Because they match perfectly with the transmission patterns we've been monitoring. You sent one message after our first meeting. A distress call, I'm guessing. But it never reached its destination, did it? Your quantum array failed." The luminescent alien's skin had dimmed noticeably. "You cannot possibly understand our technology." "Maybe not entirely," Foster admitted. "But we understand enough. Enough to know that you're not representatives of some vast galactic empire. You're stranded, aren't you? Low on resources, unable to call for help." Zekatal's posture had changed, becoming more rigid, more defensive. "The enforcement fleet will still come. The High Council doesn't know you're here," Foster finished for him. "That's why you need Earth's resources so badly. Not for some Concordat tribute, but for yourselves." A heavy silence fell over the holographic interface. Finally, Nexvoth's skin pulsed with a pattern they hadn't seen before, slower, more deliberate. "The Concordat is real," the luminescent alien said softly. "But its influence does not extend to this region of space." Zikatal turned sharply to his companion, mandibles clicking in what seemed like anger or warning. But Nexvoth continued. "We are scouts, sent to expand the Concordat's territory. We discovered your world and saw opportunity. Your technology is primitive compared to ours, but your resources are abundant. So you figured you'd scam us," Foster nodded. "Pretend to be representatives of some mighty galactic power, intimidate us into compliance, take what you need and move on." "It is not so simple," Zakatal insisted. "The Concordat's protocols are real. The protection arrangement has been implemented on other worlds." "How many?" the Secretary General asked. Another hesitation. "2, Nexvoth admitted finally. "Small colonies on resource-poor worlds. They accepted our protection willingly, because they had no choice," Foster guessed. "Struggling colonies with no defenses against a ship with superior technology."
They benefit from our guidance. Zektal maintained stubbornly. I'm sure they do, Foster said dryly. And I'm sure the resources they provide in return have nothing to do with your motivation. The Secretary General leaned forward. What happened to your ship? Why are you stranded? Nex Voth's skin rippled with what Dr. Warner had identified as resignation. A miscalculation. We attempted to navigate a gravitational anomaly to save time. The ship sustained damage. We can still maneuver, still fight if necessary, but long-distance travel is problematic. And without the quantum array, we cannot contact the Concordat. Which is probably for the best, Foster noted, since I'm guessing your superiors wouldn't approve of your little side hustle here. Ziktal's eye stalks drooped slightly. Our mission parameters allowed for creative interpretation. I bet they did, Foster smirked. So now what? Your bluff failed. You can't take Earth by force. You can't call for help. What's your play? The aliens exchanged glances before Zektal spoke again. We still possess technology far beyond yours. We could cause significant damage to your cities, your infrastructure, before you could stop us. You could, Foster acknowledged. And then what? You'd still be stranded, but with a planet full of very angry humans hunting you down. Not a great survival strategy. What do you propose? Nex Voth asked, ignoring Zektal's clicking protests. The Secretary General looked to Foster, giving him a slight nod. They had discussed this possibility extensively over the past day. A genuine exchange, Foster said. Not protection, not tribute, a fair trade. You have technology we could benefit from. We have resources you need. We help repair your ship, provide the raw materials you require, and in exchange, you share specific technological advancements with us. Nothing that would destabilize our development, no weapons, no faster-than-light drives, but medicine, clean energy, materials science. An equal exchange? Zektal sounded genuinely confused by the concept. Novel idea, I know, Foster said sarcastically. But yes, a partnership of mutual benefit rather than exploitation. And when your ship is repaired, you go your way, we go ours, and maybe we maintain communication as genuine allies rather than fake protectors and reluctant protectorates. The aliens conferred among themselves in their untranslatable combination of clicks, whistles, and light patterns. Foster could see the debate was heated, with Zektal seemingly resistant while Nex Voth appeared more pragmatic. Finally, they turned back to the human delegation. We will consider your proposal, Zektal said stiffly. But understand this. If you attempt deception, if you threaten our vessel in any way, we will respond with force. Likewise, Foster replied. Any hostile move against Earth will be met with everything we've got. And while our technology might be primitive, our resourcefulness and determination might surprise you. As the holographic interface flickered off, Henderson turned to Foster with a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect. You're enjoying this way too much, Lieutenant Commander. Foster shrugged. Just doing my part for interspecies diplomacy, Admiral. That was hardly diplomacy, the Secretary General noted dryly. Sure it was, Foster grinned. Just the kind humans have always been best at. Calling bullies on their bluff, and then offering them a way to save face. 1 month later, Foster stood on the observation deck of the International Space Station, watching as a team of human engineers and 2 of the aliens, not Zektal, who had remained stubbornly aboard their vessel, but Nex Voth and the 4th, quieter alien who had introduced himself as Arkleth, worked together on a section of the alien ship's hull. Dr. Warner floated up beside him, her tablet displaying readings from the ongoing repairs. The quantum recalibration is proceeding ahead of schedule. Their propulsion system is already back to 60% efficiency. And our end of the bargain? Foster asked. Warner smiled. The medical technology they've shared has already led to breakthroughs in cancer treatment and neurological repair. The energy conversion system they provided has increased the efficiency of our fusion experiments by 300%. And the materials science. Alex, they've shown us how to create alloys that are virtually indestructible under normal conditions. Foster nodded, satisfied. Not bad for a month's work. You know what the really interesting part is? Warner continued. Once Nex Voth realized we were genuine about the exchange, their attitude completely changed. They've been sharing knowledge beyond what we agreed upon. Cultural information, stellar cartography, even limited historical data about other civilizations they've encountered. Stockholm Syndrome? Foster suggested with a smirk. Warner rolled her eyes. More like they've never experienced genuine collaboration before. The Concordat, the real one, not their fictitious version, operates on strict hierarchies. Innovation is discouraged. Creativity is subordinated to protocol. Our approach is novel to them. Speaking of the real Concordat, Foster said. Any more details on that front? Warner's expression turned more serious.
Some. According to NXVoth, it's a genuine interstellar empire, but smaller and more fragmented than they initially implied. They control perhaps 100 systems across a region of space about 1,000 light-years in diameter. Advanced, yes, but not the galaxy-spanning civilization they pretended to be. And their typical MO? Pretty much what our friends tried here. Find developing worlds, establish protection arrangements that are fundamentally exploitative, extract resources, provide just enough technological advancement to make the exploitation more efficient. Foster frowned.
So they weren't entirely lying, just exaggerating their authority. Exactly, Warner nodded.
They're genuinely part of the Concordat's expansion initiative, but they went rogue when they got stranded, trying to secure resources by any means necessary.
And now?
Warner glanced at her tablet again. According to NXVoth, once their quantum array is repaired, they'll face a choice. Report back to the Concordat with their actual findings, or continue their independent operation, Foster finished.
With Earth as an ally rather than a victim. They seem to be leaning toward the latter, Warner confirmed. Especially NXVoth and Arkleth. Zakatal is more traditional, more committed to Concordat hierarchy. But even he seems to be recognizing the benefits of our arrangement. Foster watched as NXVoth's skin flashed in patterns that he now recognized as indicating excitement or discovery, as one of the human engineers demonstrated a technique for bonding Earth metals with alien composites. You know what the funny part is? Foster said after a moment. If they'd just shown up and asked for help instead of trying to intimidate us, we probably would have given it freely. Would we? Warner raised a skeptical eyebrow. Humanity doesn't exactly have the best track record when it comes to encountering new civilizations. Foster conceded the point with a tilt of his head.
Fair enough. But still, their whole approach was based on the assumption that intimidation and deception were the only viable strategies. They never even considered honest exchange as an option.
Cultural blindness, Warner suggested. In their experience, power differentials always lead to exploitation. The idea of mutual benefit despite asymmetric capabilities was alien to them.
Foster snorted at the pun.
Very funny, Doctor. Warner grinned. I'm serious, though.
This whole episode might be as educational for them as it is for us.
They're learning that there are alternatives to the Concordat's hierarchical model.
A dangerous lesson, Foster noted. For the Concordat, at least.
Perhaps, Warner agreed, but potentially transformative for interstellar relations in this part of the galaxy. Foster watched as NXVoth extended a tendril to steady a human engineer who had momentarily lost his grip in the zero-gravity environment. A small gesture of cooperation that would have been unthinkable a month ago. You know, he said thoughtfully, when they first arrived, I was prepared for the worst-case scenario. Invasion, subjugation, maybe even extinction. I never expected that our first contact with alien life would end with us teaching them basic fairness and cooperation. Is that what we're teaching them? Warner wondered. Or are we just showing them that humans don't respond well to bullies? Foster smiled. Maybe a bit of both. And maybe that's humanity's special contribution to the galaxy. Stubborn defiance in the face of intimidation, combined with a willingness to extend a hand once the bullying stops. That's rather optimistic coming from you. I have my moments. Foster pushed off from the observation window, floating toward the airlock that would take them to the work site. Come on, I want to see if I can convince Zakatal to finally leave his ship and join the collaboration. Still trying to win over the hardliner? Warner asked, following him. Foster shrugged. Someone has to show him that hierarchy isn't the only way to organize a civilization. Might as well be the primitive humans who called his bluff. As they prepared to join the work crew, Foster couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of the situation. Humanity's first contact with alien life had begun with a protection racket and was ending with a lesson in cooperation and mutual respect. Not exactly the scenario he'd imagined during all those years of staring up at the stars, but somehow fitting for a species that had survived and thrived through a unique combination of defiance, ingenuity, and, when necessary, knowing when to call a bluff. The aliens had offered to protect Earth, never expecting humans to ask, from who? And certainly never expecting the answer to be, in some ways, from would-be protectors themselves. It wasn't the first contact humanity had dreamed of, but perhaps it was the one they needed. A reminder that even across the vast gulfs of space, some principles remained universal. Respect had to be earned, not demanded, and true alliances could only be built on foundations of honesty and mutual benefit. As NXVoth's skin flashed in greeting at their approach,
Foster decided that maybe, just maybe, humanity's stubborn refusal to be intimidated might end up being their greatest contribution to the galaxy after all. In the years that followed, the relationship between Earth and the 4 alien visitors evolved in ways neither side could have predicted. The quantum array was successfully repaired, giving Zikatal and his crew the ability to contact the Concordat, a choice that weighed heavily on all of them. "They're having their final discussion today," Dr. Warner informed Foster as they walked through the newly constructed interspecies research facility in Geneva. The complex had been built specifically to facilitate the technological exchange, with laboratories designed to accommodate both human and alien physiologies. "And?" Foster prompted, already suspecting the answer. Warner smiled. "Nexvoth says they've decided unanimously, even Ziktal. They're staying, at least for now. They'll send a carefully worded message to the Concordat explaining that they've established a preliminary outpost in an unexplored sector and requesting official recognition of their mission." "Technically not a lie," Foster noted with approval. "The best kind of truth, selective and beneficial to all parties," Warner agreed. "The Concordat gets to believe their expansion continues, Earth remains free from unwanted protection, and our friends get to continue their work here without facing punishment for going rogue." Foster nodded thoughtfully. "And the quantum array? Are we sure they can't track the signal back to Earth?" "Nexvoth assures me the transmission will be bounced through several relay points. As far as the Concordat is concerned, they're operating in a completely different sector." "Good," Foster said. "The last thing we need is an actual enforcement fleet showing up." They reached the main laboratory, where Nexvoth and Rukleth were working alongside human scientists on what appeared to be a new form of medical scanner. The luminescent alien's skin brightened noticeably at their arrival. "Lieutenant Commander Foster, Dr. Warner." Nexvoth greeted them, the translator now perfectly calibrated to the alien's unique communication patterns. "We have achieved a breakthrough in cellular regeneration imaging. The device can now identify precancerous changes at the molecular level." "Impressive," Foster acknowledged. "And please, Nexvoth, I've told you a dozen times. It's just Alex now." The alien's skin rippled in what they'd come to recognize as amusement. "Military hierarchies are deeply ingrained in my understanding, Lou. Alex, old habits, as you humans say." "Speaking of old habits," Warner interjected, "we heard about your decision regarding the Concordat." Urkleth, who had been mostly silent during their early interactions but had gradually become more comfortable with the humans, responded in his deep, rumbling voice. "It was the logical choice. The opportunities here are unprecedented." "He means," Nexvoth clarified with flashing patterns of humor, "that nowhere in Concordat space would we be permitted to conduct independent research, develop new technologies without oversight, or form genuine collaborative partnerships. We would be, what is your phrase? Small fish in a big pond, whereas here you're big fish in a small pond," Foster suggested. "No," Rukleth corrected solemnly. "Here we are simply fish among different fish, swimming together." Foster blinked in surprise. It was perhaps the most poetic thing he'd ever heard from the typically taciturn alien. "That's actually a beautiful way to put it." "Where's Ziktal?" Warner asked, noticing the absence of the mantis-like alien who had originally led the delegation. "Meeting with your military officials," Nexvoth replied. "Discussing defensive strategies." Foster raised an eyebrow. "Defensive strategies? Against what?" "The universe is vast and not uniformly peaceful," Rukleth rumbled. "The Concordat is not the only interstellar power, merely the one we know best." "Are we in danger?" Warner asked, concerned. Nexvoth's skin displayed calming patterns. "Not immediately. But Zikatal believes, and we agree, that sharing knowledge of potential threats is part of our responsibility as, how did he phrase it? Actual allies rather than false protectors." Foster couldn't help but smile at that. The formerly rigid Zikatal had perhaps undergone the most profound transformation of all. Initially the most resistant to collaboration, he had eventually embraced the human approach with an almost religious conversion, becoming an advocate for genuine exchange rather than hierarchical control. "Well, that's progress," Foster acknowledged. "From threatening us with a fictional enforcement fleet to helping us prepare for actual threats. The irony is not lost on him," Nexvoth assured them, skin pulsing with amusement. "He has developed what I believe you call a sense of humor about the whole situation." "Miracles do happen," Foster muttered. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from Warner's tablet. She checked the screen and her eyes widened. "It's the Deep Space Monitoring Network," she explained. "They've detected something entering the solar system, something big.
Foster felt a chill run down his spine. How big? Massive, Warner replied, showing him the readings. And it's using a propulsion system similar to our friend's ship, but much more powerful. Nexvoth and Rarkaleth exchanged concerned glances, their alien expressions unreadable to human eyes, but their body language unmistakably alarmed. We should contact Zaktal immediately, Nexvoth said, all humor gone from their communication patterns. Chapis. 3 hours later, Foster stood in the United Nations Security Council chamber once again, an unsettling sense of déjà vu washing over him. This time, however, Zikatal stood beside him rather than across from him, facing the holographic image of an alien vastly different from any of their 4 visitors. The new alien resembled nothing so much as a massive jellyfish, translucent tissues pulsing with internal bioluminescence, tentacle-like appendages drifting gracefully even in the static holographic projection. When it spoke, the voice that emerged from the translator was melodious, almost hypnotic. Greetings, representatives of Earth. I am Overseer Vilnarath of the Hegemonic Collective. We have detected your world's technological signature and come to offer you our protection in these dangerous times. Foster couldn't help it. He burst out laughing. The jellyfish-like alien's tentacles stiffened in what might have been surprise or offense. I fail to see the humor in our generous offer. Zaktal stepped forward, mandibles clicking in what Foster now knew was suppressed amusement. Overseer Vilnarath, I am High Emissary Zekatal of the Galactic Concordat. Earth is already under protection arrangement. The holographic alien's tentacles writhed in agitation. The Concordat has no claim in this sector. This is beyond your recognized territory. And yet here we are, Zaktal replied smoothly, with an established outpost and formal alliance with the indigenous civilization. Foster cleared his throat. What my colleague means to say, Overseer, is that Earth doesn't require protection. From you, from the Concordat, or from anyone else. We're quite capable of determining our own destiny. The alien's translucent tissues pulsated rapidly. Impossible! A world at your development stage cannot survive without patronage. The dangers of interstellar politics are greatly exaggerated by those seeking to exploit developing worlds. Foster finished for him. Yeah, we've heard this sales pitch before. Recently, in fact. Vilnarath's tentacles whipped back and forth in obvious agitation. This is unprecedented! The protocols clearly state, the protocols, Foster interrupted again, are bullshit. They're just excuses for advanced civilizations to colonize and exploit less developed ones under the guise of protection. And we're not interested. The alien seemed genuinely stunned into silence. Beside Foster, Zekatal's mandibles clicked in what he now recognized as approval. Perhaps, Zaktal suggested to the holographic alien, the hegemonic collective should consider a different approach to interstellar relations. One based on mutual respect and fair exchange rather than exploitation. Absurd, Vilnarath finally sputtered. Such arrangements are inefficient and chaotic. Hierarchy is the natural order of the universe. And yet, Foster noted, here we are, humans and Concordat representatives standing as equals, having achieved more through cooperation in a few months than your hierarchical system has accomplished in centuries. This defiance will not stand, the jellyfish-like alien declared. The collective has the power to... To what? Foster challenged. Force compliance? Because I have to tell you, Overseer, humanity doesn't respond well to threats. And now we have friends with advanced technology and a shared interest in maintaining our independence. Siktal stepped forward again. I suggest you return to your collective, Overseer Vilnarath, and reconsider your expansion strategies. This sector is, how shall I put it, not receptive to traditional protection arrangements. The holographic alien's tentacles lashed in what was clearly fury. This is not over, Emissary Zekatal. The collective will remember this interference. And Earth will remember this attempted exploitation, Foster added cheerfully. Safe travels, Overseer. Don't let the solar wind hit you on the way out. The holographic projection flickered and disappeared. Foster turned to Zekatal with a raised eyebrow. Well, that was familiar. The alien's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Foster had come to recognize as their version of laughter. Indeed, though I find myself on the opposite side of the negotiation this time. How the tables have turned, Foster agreed. Think they'll actually leave? Zektal's eye stalk swiveled thoughtfully. The hegemonic collective is powerful but not foolhardy. They prefer easy conquests, willing subjects intimidated by displays of superior technology. Just like someone else I know, Foster said with a smirk. As you humans say, I deserved that, Zektal acknowledged. But yes, they will likely retreat and seek easier prey, for now. For now? The galaxy is vast, Lieutenant Commander, and filled with powers seeking to expand their influence. Earth's development will not go unnoticed. Others will come. Foster nodded soberly. Then I guess we'd better keep working on those defensive systems you've been discussing with our military. Indeed, Zektal agreed. But perhaps Earth's greatest defense is not technology, but attitude. Attitude? Your species' remarkable ability to call a bluff, Zektal explained, mandibles clicking softly, to see through deception and stand firm against intimidation. It is not common among developing worlds. Foster smiled. Well, we've had plenty of practice with our own bullies throughout history. A useful evolutionary adaptation, it seems, Zektal observed. One that may serve you well as you venture further into the galaxy. Foster looked out the window at the night sky, stars twinkling in the darkness. You know, when I was a kid dreaming about aliens, I always imagined wise, benevolent beings coming to share their knowledge with humanity. I never thought our first contact would be with interstellar con artists trying to run a protection racket. The universe rarely conforms to our expectations, Zektal noted philosophically. True, Foster agreed. But sometimes the reality turns out better than the fantasy. Instead of benevolent overlords dispensing wisdom from on high, we got flawed beings we could actually relate to. Beings capable of learning and changing, just like us. An optimistic interpretation, Zektal said, eye stalks tilting in what Foster had learned was their equivalent of a smile. I have my moments, Foster replied. Now let's go see if our new jellyfish friends are actually leaving, or if we need to give them a more persuasive demonstration of Earth's attitude. As they walked together toward the monitoring station, Foster reflected on how far they'd come from that first confrontational meeting. From adversaries to allies, from attempted exploiters to genuine partners. It wasn't the first contact humanity had dreamed of, but perhaps it was the one they needed. A reminder that even across the stars, the most important lessons remain the same. Stand your ground, see through the lies, and offer genuine friendship to those willing to do the same. The universe might be filled with bullies and con artists, but as Earth was proving, there was room for something better. And maybe, just maybe, humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization wouldn't be their technology or their resources, but their stubborn insistence on being treated as equals, no matter how advanced the beings they encountered. After all, as humans had learned throughout their long and turbulent history, the first step to earning respect wasn't asking for protection. It was having the courage to ask, from who? And the wisdom to know when the answer was from the very ones offering to protect you. End.